All right. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. It is Wednesday, April 15th, otherwise affectionately known by Americans here in the United States as Tax Day. You're here for interviewing like a human in the AI world. My name is Albert. I'm the founder of Albert's List and the co host of this webinar with Callings.ai. Albert's List is a job search, AI, and side hustle company helping you become the most resilient professional you can possibly be in your day to day professional life. And Callings.ai, you will hear about as we get to the end of this webinar as the platform of choice for helping you conduct your job search in an AI first world. So, a little bit about me just to start whenever I figure out how to click this downward. There we go. I'm a San Francisco Bay Area born and raised job search entrepreneur and product marketer by day. You can connect with me on LinkedIn here below. And I'm also the founder, as I mentioned, of Albert's List. We're a community of 50,700 members on Facebook with lots of recruiters, job seekers, hiring managers, and opportunities to network on a regular basis. And so feel free to join up there. Let us know that you found our community through this webinar, and we will be happy to add you. All right, cool. So today we're going to talk about a few things here. As you know, AI has become front and center to where things are. It is what companies do to try and hire faster. And as job seekers, we always need to adjust to these new realities. So we're going to talk about that first. We're then going to talk about AI as a coach and as a automation process that is used in your job interview these days. And then we're going to go into really just how the interview process is thought of now and how to kind of work together and really create a deliberate process so that as you do your interview, you can really think and make sense of everything as you think through. This webinar is being recorded. And before we go any further, there will also be, if you have any questions, use the Q&A or the webinar chat. Laura will help along the way with that. So the new realities of where this market is, I don't think anybody really needs to tell you, right, that we're in this place where it's layoff galore right now. And, really often not for the reasons that we think they are. Whether you think it's AI or overhiring still from the pandemic or whatnot. And so, regardless of what those macroeconomic forces may be, the reality of it is too is that if you're on the job market, it seems like the candidate pool that you're competing against is more and more competitive. You are no doubt seeing that it's probably the situation where a lot of hiring managers and companies are looking for that purple squirrel because that purple squirrel in their mind can be found, as opposed to during the Great Resignation, during that early pandemic period where everybody seemed to be hiring for everything because they could, and even if you didn't have direct experience, you could still be considered qualified in the process. And so, we're now at this point where numbers aside, right, there are now more unemployed than there are job openings. And the non-farm payrolls that come out of the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, at least, show that there continue to be downward revisions when it comes to job hunting. And for employers who have openings, and no doubt this might be reflective of those of you who live outside of the United States as well, where similar issues with regards to just slowing markets continue to plague various countries. And of course, right, with global political uncertainty and wars and so forth, and continuing downward pressures from AI, these numbers only stand to just get worse as the months go on. And so, right, it's mainly going to be competitive and it's going to be hard to figure out what comes next, in particular, especially as you try and get one of those coveted interviews. And so preparation is no longer the differentiator of what it is when it comes to your job search and interviewing process. Employers clearly have their pick, and we're also all using AI. And it's kind of one of these arms races now where job seekers are creating their own AI agents to do their job searching. And job seekers and even job search organizations like myself are teaching job seekers to use AI to to strategize their job search, write those cover letters, prepare for those interviews, and so forth. And so companies are using AI, job seekers are using AI, and so at this point, right, in the next couple of years, we might just have robots interviewing other robots, which, until we get there is kind of interesting. But until we get there, you still need to at least get into the interview process. And AI, right, we also know has helped people become super polished in their interview process. With just a few prompts, you can write out, you can copy and paste your resume into ChatGPT. You can copy and paste a job description and say, hey, ChatGPT, tell me how to prepare for this interview, create a table of questions, answers from my resume, and help me sound polished. And ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these will use whatever they have to make you sound really polished. And for the untrained eye, for perhaps the job seeker who really wants to get the job, they will memorize their answers word for word in hopes that they will sound like the best candidate in the room. And as much that as that sounds like the thing to do, you ended up joining this webinar because maybe you realize there's more nuance to this, and there will be a little bit more stringent reviews as somebody listens to your answers. I know that when we do mock interviews on Albert's List, it's a frequent thing where our recruiter will ask if you sound a little too polished, whether you're reading off of something. And if you are, in fact, reading off of something or not reading off something, it could cost you your job because you don't sound like the most authentic person in the room. And right, so this here exactly in this situation is one of these slides where you may create a table like this because for the job search geek and nerd like myself, if I'm going to prep for my interview, I want to anticipate what's coming ahead. And so I want to know, right, that I might get some star questions, some hypothetical questions, some personality based questions. And I really want to uncover what's here. And so this is for a resume that I did and a job description that I did some weeks ago. And so, right, Alex's proposed answer in the rightmost column is what somebody who may, to the untrained eye, may say, you know what? I'm going to take this to the pool, to the beach, into the mountains, into a cabin, and I'm going to spend the weekend memorizing this. And then I'm going to go into my interview and I'm going to sound completely polished, and they're going to hire me because of that. And like we've been saying, right, that's probably not the move moving forward because it sounds like you're reading off something, especially if you're doing your interviews over Zoom or over Teams. We're also getting to a point now, right, where companies want people to come into the office and you surrender your notes because they want to know whether you actually did the work or not along the way. And so that's something to consider as well. And so we know that when it comes to anything in this world, that being able to build that level of trust in the interview, which has always been there, is what matters a lot. And so if you take away nothing from today's webinar, know that personal connection matters when it comes to the interview process, right? And the typical thing that dominates when it comes to networking, when it comes to making friends, when it comes to building personal relationships, is that people hire people, people get to meet people, and people befriend people who are who they befriend people who they know, who they like, and who they trust. And the sooner that you can get to the point where you can know, be known, be liked, and be trusted, is the sooner that you become somebody that when the hiring manager asks, are these enough for me to want to hire them? The answer becomes an unequivocal yes. And so the first thing that we want to talk about today within this webinar is, if you are going to use AI, what exactly do you use AI for? Right? We just spent the last 10 minutes or so talking about how the new nuances of AI and the new rules of the game mean that while you probably could use AI and should use AI because your competition is, that you should also look at AI in a nuanced manner. And so we should talk about what that looks like. We know what you should could use AI for, but we're going to start by talking about what you shouldn't use it for. And for better or for worse, this is kind of the things that we've sort of abdicated our AI usage to, such as replacing our thinking process, creating our interview answer bank, defining our value proposition, using the answers as is. And this is all really easy because you can now prompt all this. And because AI is out here doing a lot of implying and thinking that it can probably help you replace that, we've now kind of given our thinking to them. And as much as we can give a lot of our thinking to them, whether it's thinking about what food we want to eat or what we want to do on vacation, we are still the ones who own our careers and have been working in the jobs that we have for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And so as we are looking for that next job, we ultimately also get to decide what we want to do next. And so creating an interview answer bank that corresponds to that or defining our value proposition is something that only we know that we can do because at the end of the day, we are the ones that experienced that career. ChatGPT and all these other AIs have only been around for at most 4 years and change. And so, right, this also reminds me of what we've allowed AI to do in sucking the oxygen out of the room when it comes to anything and everything that we seem to do these days. What you see here on the left is a popular slide that IBM used back in the 1970s when talking about computing. It reads, "A computer can never be held accountable. Therefore, a computer must never make a management decision." And this is a fascinating thing to read in 2026 because, in a lot of ways, we've now started to hold computers accountable, regardless of how much they hallucinate. And we've allowed computers to make management decisions, inclusive of using OpenClaw or Claude Code or Replit to build our websites, build our apps, build job search and AI agents and so forth. And I think this is also going to be an acceptable new normal because it's simply the rate of speed at which we want companies to think at the expense of potentially originality. And so, what you can use AI to do is identify gaps, maybe practice questions along the way using audio mode and these various AIs, discover things that maybe you've never seen before, and allow for that explainability that otherwise may take you weeks and months to do so. I know that when it comes to job searching and even preparing for your job search, because we here at Albert's List host a webinar called How to Prepare and Strategize Your Job Search with AI in Just 1 hour. We've definitely given our computer that level of accountability, but what it also allows us to do is it gives us that sense of speed, but you still have to review it at the end of the day because AI can and has and will hallucinate along when you, as when you're doing whatever you're doing with it. And so, what's one thing that the next couple of sections we're going to talk about is what you can use AI to use to do, but then also complement that with what we're going to call human in the loop type of processes, right? And even also with this thing, it's also important for us to mention, and I started mentioning this in the webinars that we do, is that I myself am not an AI. I'm probably going to throw in some ums and ahs in there just to show you that I'm not some pre-trained model giving you these webinars at the end of the day. I am live, I am real, I could probably pull a few specks of hair out, and we're here to actually give you live advice from real people on how to do your job search. So just going back to that a little bit, right? We want to talk about building your core story bank as one of the main pieces that you're going to do as you conduct your interview preparation. And the reason why we talk about that is because the foundation of your interview is all the stories that you are going to tell, and the stories of the work that you've done. And the reason why is because stories prove that your past success is your future potential, is equivalent to your future potential. And the reason why we say that is, simply put, interviews come down to two things more or less, along with proving that your past success equals your future potential. Number one, your interview is all about mitigating risk. And where that all comes from is that companies as you can see in the AI world right now, are not interested necessarily in hiring people if they don't have to, because hiring people means that there's more people to manage, there's more costs to bring in that are on a consistent basis versus operational one-off costs. They got to deal with emotions. They have employees who might need to take paid vacations, that may need to go pick up children, et cetera, and so forth. And that's the unfortunate piece, right? And so as an interviewee, you need to go in and you need to mitigate risk and make yourself stand out as the best candidate possible, which leads us to number two, which is selling yourself as the best solution, or what I like to say is creating a level of excitement that really brings into people that level of interest to want to talk to you further. And as we said, right, it's all about really showing that your past success equates to your future potential. And what that really means is that they're hoping that what you've done in the past is simply going to continue and keep going on. And I like to say that while that might definitely work in the professional world, it is something that your stockbroker hopes that you never fall into a trap of believing. And so, how do you navigate this part of telling a story? What does telling a story mean? And we've traditionally talked about it from the standpoint of the STAR method. The STAR method, the CAR method, the SAR method, if you've never heard of before, is a storytelling method that uses a framework to really showcase what it is that you've done to prove that past success can equal future potential. STAR method in particular stands for situation, task, action, and result. And each of these are a building block in how you describe what you did for a previous project. And so somebody might ask you, tell me about a time when you failed. Tell me about a time when you had to manage your time better and what you did to do so. And so you're going to lay out the story, say what you did to take action upon that, and then provide the result of your action and how it makes you look really, really good. And so, how do you navigate also being able to tell a story? You also tell a story and understand by talking about how you, on understanding how your presence in the organization will impact others. A lot of us go into interviews thinking that we're going to talk a lot about ourselves and we're going to talk about what we've done in the past and what we bring to the table, and hopefully that'll all hire us. That'll result in our hiring. The real thing is, though, is that companies are hiring because they know that you're going to fit a gap that they've long held in their organization. And so, understanding what's at stake to your colleagues, your boss, your company, the customer, your industry, and everything else in between is really showing that you're doing your homework, but that you're also going to get hired because you are bringing services that you have that will help other people. So it's kind of that subtle way of saying that I am the best candidate possible. And I am also understanding what your problems are, right? One of my favorite questions to ask during the interview process is to say, what is one thing that I can do if you hire me to make you really look really, really, really good in front of your boss? And it always gets a laugh out of other people. But what it really means is there's something here that's causing you to hire me today that you otherwise wouldn't do. And what exactly is that I can do so that something can be taken off your plate, something that can make your boss look really good, or something that can help the company make even more money than it already has. And so what you're going to do along the way is you're going to create stories that you can speak to. You're going to have to understand and remember along the way throughout your body of work, 10, 20, 30 years, what it is that you can do that speaks back to the work that you've done. And you can use AI to understand at a high level maybe what some of those stories are, but you yourself need to become familiar and not necessarily memorize those details to help you get through, because you not only want to tell a story that says, hey, I was in this situation and I did this and I did that, and these were the results. But you also want to say it in a way where it's very conversational, where maybe it's somebody that you're speaking to when maybe you're out getting a drink, something that showcases that you can be human along the way and not have said, okay, I spent my weekend in the cabin memorizing 15 chat GPT answers for this interview today. And so you're going to develop a story bank. And so what this looks like is you're going to type into ChatGPT you're going to copy and paste your resume, you're going to copy and paste the job description, and you're going to say, help me prepare for this job interview. And you're going to say, here's the company name. Column B is like the interview question. Column C is the raw story. And then column D is the interview answer. And what you're going to do, as you do with every single AI prompt, is you're going to review the answer that has been given by AI along the way. And you're going to say, you know what? I like this story or I don't like this story. And then I'm going to build upon this story and ensure that the answer that I give not doesn't only sound like an LLM produced it, but that it's something that I would be able to comfortably speak to and speak to decently. And so at the end of the day, you're using AI to augment, but you're not having it take over for you. And so that's the first piece, right? In that you want to really use AI to tell that story and tell a cohesive and meaningful story. But that's not the only types of questions that you're going to get during the interview process. I'm also going to say, when you go into a job interview, you're also going to hit different questions that border along the line of wanting to know how you think. These are what we call hypothetical questions, and these are also the logical questions that you may be familiar with from the Googles and the eBays of the world from the mid 2010s. That may have asked, tell me how many ping pong balls fit inside a 747, or tell me how many phone books fit inside of the island of Manhattan in New York City. They're stupidly inane questions, but they're questions that they ask because they want to know how you go about thinking and executing. And then, of course, there's the more hypothetical questions that might say, let's say we gave you this marketing program. What would you do to ensure its success? Or let's say you were in conflict with a colleague or a conflict with a customer over this billing issue. What would you do to ensure that the customer received top-notch service and that you could ensure that we retain them as a customer? Those are all show your thinking questions, which really highlight how you would operate once you're in that particular job, and also focus on the strategic value that you bring versus the task-driven value that companies have been used to in the past, right? So they want that peek into your mind, and what it is that you speak about and how you prioritize what you speak about are going to be incredibly important. And so what you want to do is you want to talk about your decision-making process. And you want to be authentic about that decision-making process too, because sometimes, and most of the time with everything that we do in our work, it's not necessarily a straight line from A to B in terms of thinking like, okay, what exactly does this look like when it comes to doing something? So using phrases that signal how you think is really important too, because it shows a level of ownership and it shows how you think through anything in the first place. So for example, we'll go through a couple of these phrases and you can drop in some phrases in the webinar chat yourself. There are phrases like what I realized, which signals the lessons that you've learned along the way. Another one is, although it may seem easy, it's that realization that something is a lot more complicated than you imagined it to be. You can also use other phrases that showcase your strategic value, such as I reached out to, which talks about your collaboration and friendliness, or saying I thought to, as a reflection on what it is that you did. One of the things that I haven't mentioned on this slide is also really just the state of where jobs are headed today as well. If you have a job today, perhaps that is a lot more skill-based, hit a react button in the webinar, in the Zoom chat, right? The thumbs up or whichever, right? You could be an accountant. You might be a content writer. You could be a software engineer. You could be somebody who enters data. And all of those things in the traditional AI world are becoming less and less interesting to companies because they are repeatable task driven activities. And what that all means is that as AI agents come into being and as AI agents pick up Claude skills and skills from these other LLMs that allow them to do what we humans consider to be repeatable work, it is very important for us to move and shift our mindset from the aspect of thinking like a task driven person into a strategy driven person. So if you're a marketing individual, start thinking like a CMO. If you're a graphic designer, start thinking like a creative director. If you're somebody who is an accountant, start thinking like a controller. And for all those industries and all those work areas, I really don't know how anybody thinks in those outside of marketing because I myself am a marketer. And as you go through that, pepper in that thinking process into your interviews because that's ultimately what this is. What companies are going to be hiring in 5 years or less is going to be people who can act as if they are operators in that particular area. Less so saying, oh, I can do pivot tables or I can write a really great blog post. But how you put all the pieces together and how you think through putting all those pieces together is going to really showcase who you are and why they should hire you over another person. And so we've gone from being able to understand how the game is played to understanding again how the game is still played, but the terms of those games have completely transitioned into something new. And so that leads us to our next tip for how to interview in an AI world, which is while you think about everything strategically, while you understand all of your stories, is to be conversational, right? You want to talk with inflection. You want to talk with passion. You want to talk with a level of reflection and a lot of self awareness that you know why you're taking on this job, even if it's a survival job, but you also know that what's happened in the past, you can recreate in the future, and you can speak to it in a way that your audience can relate to and can understand. So, what's to understand about interviews, right? Is that we all know how coveted an interview is these days. Feeling like doing these webinars during this economic downturn, one thing I've realized along the way, it's like getting an interview is like being Smog in The Lord of the Rings and getting that ring, right? We all want that ring at this point, even though we might not be able to keep it because interviews are very fleeting and far in between. And so, what I want you to know is that if you've gotten an interview, and even if it's a phone interview with the recruiter, you've already made it this far. They want to talk to you because something within your experience was attention grabbing. And when you get into the hiring manager interview, what it's become is a true conversation about understanding your fit, understanding who you are, understanding what your motivations are for this particular role, and how it fits in the narrative of your career so far. And so you're in that interview conversation already. They at least know you and they like you to some effect. And now it's time to build that trust. And what comes from that trust is just qualifications, but also likability. And it's also your ability to gauge fit for them as well, as far as whether that's a company that you would like to spend 40 hours plus of your week working at. And so you've already made it this far. You're already somebody who's made it to a point where you're in the room. All you have to think about now is taking advantage of being in that situation, being somebody who has that singular level of attention and making it work. And so what you're going to do is you're going to learn how to engage the interviewer, right? So it's not just, don't just ask questions when you've given the chance. Bring it back to them. Look for humor. Look for places where there's this common bond of what it means to be in the workplace where everything is not necessarily perfect. But also, what you can do is create an opportunity to relate to the interviewer because we've all been in an office before, I think, for the most part, if we're in this webinar today. We all know that what everybody sees publicly is hardly what everybody knows to be privately because above the surface, everything looks calm, but underneath the surface, everyone is paddling super, super, super hard. And so, one thing you can do is to ask the interviewer what they might have done in the situation if you give them that story, and see how that might be handled there. Right there, while they're looking for perhaps a fresh set of eyes, maybe you can use that chance to share your fresh set of eyes to also understand what they may have done, given their incumbent situations and situations and so forth. And so that leads me to my final thoughts about what it means to interview in an AI world. That number one, right? That people hire those that they know, like, and trust. And interviewing is more so about liking and trusting because we live in a world where that's at a deficit, especially in a world where maybe people who are interviewing on Zoom aren't necessarily who they are, or that AI imagery is very real now. You want people to know that you are real and that you are authentic. Number two, it's that AI can help you get into the room, but you are responsible for what happens the rest of the way. And so AI can help you think, but it shouldn't be something that replaces where you are, who you are, and so forth. And in addition to that, it should also help you guide your thinking, but it should not replace your thinking. And that's most important in a world where a lot of task driven work is going out of the way, but going into a world where we have to think like creative directors and chief marketing officers and chief financial officers and so forth. Number three is to strive for authenticity within conversation. So how do you keep it real? How do you leverage humor? How do you bring your interviewer into your conversation and into a world where you can both relate with a common pain? And finally, to do your homework. Understanding what's at stake in the organization is incredibly important because you want to be in the type of situation where you understand what's at stake for your boss, for your company, for your customers, for your colleagues, and for the industry at large, right? And so part of being authentic, as you're saying, Bill, is having the camera on versus having the camera off where possible. If you can have your camera on, I would say have it on more than you have it off. I know we're in that post Zoom era, but having it on will make you look more real. And so, with that, I want to thank you for your time today. I have a couple of other things that I want to share. For those of you who are in the San Francisco Bay Area or perhaps near to the Bay Area, we have something coming up that Callings.ai and Albert's List are partnering up with called the Career Transition Conference. If you want to take your AI skills further and you want to take your ability to work in the AI era a lot further, we have this event for you in San Francisco where you can collaborate with others and meet others who are in the same journey as you are. We also have a virtual option that we'll be adding as well. So check this out so that you can see and discover what it means to be in the future of AI, along with your interviews and along with what it is that you're doing. And then finally, I want to also show that we want to give you a demo of Callings.ai. So if you want to learn how to use AI appropriately for your job search, Callings.ai/Albert. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Garrett, co-founder and CEO of Callings.ai, to give you all a demo. Garrett, over to you.
Thanks, Albert. And I'm going to keep on topic on the tools that specifically we provide that will help you function through the processes that Albert talked about for interviewing. I'll show you a few things first, just so you understand that we cover many aspects of the job hunt. But thank you, Albert. That was fantastic. What a great overview of interviewing. My biggest takeaway is prepare, prepare, prepare. So what I'm going to show you now is Callings.ai. We are a comprehensive AI platform specifically built for candidates, for job seekers. And we offer tools, AI-powered tools, across many aspects of the job hunt. And so I'm going to share my screen here and show you a few of those. Um, so I'm going to focus most of my time in interviewing. I'll just overview a few of the other things that we do. So we provide a powerful job tracker that allows you to track your entire job hunt in one place. When you activate Callings, you upload your resume privately. By the way, we don't share that information with anyone without your permission. Um, we activate a series of AI-powered tools. One of the first ones is that we find job matches against a database of millions of jobs that actually you're qualified for using semantic AI search technologies. And so the goal here is so that you don't have to hunt and peck to find a job, but rather we look across the entire database to find jobs that you're actually qualified for and give you matches so that you can identify those opportunities. And statistically, and this is not good news to share, but I want to be honest with you, the average job seeker now has to apply to about 50 jobs before they land. And so you need to find a lot of opportunities to attack. And that's what we do for you. Pretty soon we'll have a database of up to 14 million jobs. So that will be shipping very soon. So we help you find jobs, we help you track the jobs, and then for every job that you're tracking in your tracker, we have a series of powerful tools to help you actively consider and evaluate that job, prepare for that job by preparing custom resumes and cover letters, um, which these aren't generated. Um, but we'll generate a cover letter and a resume for you that are tailored to this job using your information authentically. And you have complete control over every edit that is happening on these items. We also will look out and find networking contacts for those jobs that you can reach out to that are connected specifically, not just at the company, but at the role that you're applying to. And then we provide you a full interview prep for the jobs that you're pursuing based on the job post and your background, which I'm going to go into in a bit. So that's one whole functional state, which is finding and applying and pursuing jobs. That's built into the platform. The other thing that we provide is the ability to run a detailed insights report about yourself. We help you identify your goals, and we generate these reports based on your resume and the answers you give us. So this is a reflection back to you of what you're saying about yourself. We also help you identify what an ideal job would look like for you based on what you tell us. And by the way, if it's not exactly right, the response is that your resume is telling a different story than what you're actually pursuing. We generate powerful brand elements for you. Think of this as a cheat sheet brochure of yourself, and we simply recast back to you your 20-second elevator pitch, your 2-minute pitch, your professional summary, headlines. Many of our users print this out and read it like an actor studying it so that they have quick responses to common questions like, who are you? What are you looking for? Why should I hire you? Our intent is not to speak for you, but to give you the concepts that you can put into your own language. And I'm often reminded of what Anthony Hopkins said when he reads for a movie. He will read the script 100 times and continue to repeat it to himself. And at that point, he's memorized the script and he can act and completely normally to whatever happens in a scene. And I think there's some aspect of that might be valuable for a job seeker, which is if you can really embody all the stories and technology, stories and responses and messaging and value propositioning about yourself and put it into your own words, then when you're in interviews or meeting somebody informationally, those will come out for you. And so these brand elements can be very powerful for you in the interview process. We also do a market fit report where we evaluate you against the market and show you what markets are strong, which might be perspectives for you to pursue, and give you sort of an up-to-date view of where you are in the marketplace. So that's all part of my insights. Um, We have tools for pursuing companies where there may not be an open position, which is reverse recruiting or boss shopping. And those tools are in the target companies section. And we offer tools for helping you improve and evaluate your resume as well. So, the final thing I'll show you before I dive into networking in particular, excuse me, interviewing in particular, is we have a new feature called My Campaign. It is very difficult to get noticed in this world. And so what we've built is a calling card which advertises your value proposition. And what it is a landing page which includes a powerful graphic that in a glance tells your story, a quick statement of what you do best and what your value proposition is, what you're looking for, why you among any large number of candidates, and key highlights of your career, as well as a place for people they can download your resume and have a quick glance at your career. And this is similar to something like Kickstarter in the sense that you can send this out to your network and then they can introduce you. And we even help you identify for them who you want to talk to so that they know exactly who to introduce you to. And when they click on it, we will generate an outreach message for them. What we heard from people who want to help job seekers is they don't know how and they don't know what they're supposed to say. And so we help them with all of that. They can also give you a shout out on social media and increase your personal SEO. And you yourself can post this using the Callings My Campaign features. You can promote it to your supporters, as I just mentioned, but you can also promote yourself on social media and get lots of views and people looking at you so that they know what your value proposition is, what you're looking for, and the fact that you're available. So check out My Campaign. The first calling card is free. If you want to customize it with advanced features, you can change the graphics, etc. Then you can subscribe. But your basic calling card is free on the platform. So is finding jobs, saving and tracking jobs, and applying to jobs. Those are always free on our platform. So with that, now I want to talk about the stuff that Albert mentioned. On the My Insights thing, I think the first thing I'd recommend for everybody is run their brand elements and reflect it against their own personal feelings to see if these are messages that can help you as you're going through the lengthy process of interviewing or talking to people. An interview can go in so many different directions. I think what Albert suggested, which is that you have to have a story bank and a messaging bank, is spot on. And what we do is help you using AI. We help you to hone your messaging with your own authentic details about yourself. And the result, of course, is that these leap off the tongue. So you can talk about yourself without seeming rehearsed or memorized. And so I encourage you all to go to Callings today and you can generate a My Brand Elements in that first 30 days, and this gives you material, professional headlines. If they ask you, well, what makes you unique? We call out things from your resume and the responses that you give us that answer that question. Top 10 skills, top 10 achievements. And these come up all the time, not just in formal interviews, but when you're talking to people in networking environments, when you meet people at parties. If you tell them that you're looking for something in a specific industry, immediately they jump into questions like, well, tell me about your background. What achievements have you done? Why are you qualified? And so you have to have these things prepared, and we help you do that. Um, so I encourage you to check that out. And then the other thing is for every one of the jobs in the tracker, as I mentioned, we generate an interview report that's highly detailed. Let me see if I have one that's pre-generated. Did I not generate any of these? Oh my God. Um, Let me see if I can just go into a different account. Hmm. So I'll log in here and just click on one of these jobs here, this Adobe job. And our for each of these jobs, and they're custom for every single one, we look at the job post, we look at the company, we look at all the information from My Insights and your resume. And then what we do is we generate a full featured report for the interview that's upcoming. Now, You have to do the interview on your own. Our goal is to try and give you background, some of the materials that Albert talked about. And so the first thing that we do is we give you an overview of what this job is and what the interview is likely about. We give you a pep talk about why you're qualified by looking at your background. And by the way, we score you against all of these jobs so you can see whether you're qualified. We call out pitfalls, and these are not things that you're flawed with. These are the natural weaknesses that everybody has in a candidacy, and we call them out so that you can protect. So you can identify where they might push that makes you uncomfortable and have preparation ready. And then proposed strategy. We identify, based on lots of data about past interviews, who the likely interviewers are going to be that you're facing. It's almost always a recruiter first that does a pre-screening. We articulate what their focus is going to be. In the case of a recruiter, initial fit, interest in the company, salary expectations, work authorization, location, and skills, and then what their expectation is when they talk to you. You have to remember that when you talk to people in an interview, they have different goals, right? So the recruiter is not picking you for the job. Their job is to qualify you so that you can talk to the hiring manager. And so we provide that, and we call out likely people that you're likely to talk with, so you have some sense of what expectation they're going to have, so that you can steer those interviews to hit those expectations. Now, this is, as Albert pointed out, this is not a replacement for your own free will and self-thinking. It is constructs to help you prepare. The next thing we call out are likely interview topics. And, many companies they have a standard script, and these scripts go all around industries. And so this is our best guess at what a likely set of interview topics are going to be for this role. And we call them out. We give you a description of what they are and how you can prepare for them. We also call out likely questions that they're going to ask you and how to answer them. These are not things that you should read back. These are things that you should read to yourself so that you can store your way of articulating these answers and have them prepared. And this goes back to the Anthony Hopkins thing, which is if you go through this report and the other reports and the preparations that you do and practice them to yourself, they will jump off the tongue when those questions come to you. And as Albert mentioned, you've got to make certain you put them into your own parlance, in your own style. And if you're prepared, that will happen. The next thing we provide is behavioral questions, and these are almost always standard parts of an interview process. And as Albert mentioned, the STAR system is a good way to talk through those. And so we call out likely questions, and then we do some mock answers that you can study using the STAR system to help you prepare. Questions you can ask are also an important part of any interview. It has to be a two-way street. In fact, some companies will disqualify you if you're passive and do not ask questions of your own. So you have to be prepared for that. And we help call out things that might make sense for you to ask about, so that you can get them talking about the company. And then, of course, we call out a whole bunch of resources where you can continue to prepare. Some companies, for example, Google, has these tests that they provide that are very specific. And if you do research, you oftentimes can find details about those tests specific to the company that you should prep for. And and the only way to do that is to do the practices. And so what we've heard from our users is that this report is very helpful to them. They print it out, they study it, they download it and put it into ChatGPT and ask continue have additional questions and lines of pursuit for them. And so we generate this for each job that you're pursuing. And it's a great starting point for you in the interview process. So there's obviously many other things that you can look at, but I just wanted to highlight that these are some of the things that you'll find available in Callings.ai. Our idea is that the person is at the center of everything, and authenticity is at the center of everything, and then we use AI to help accelerate and enhance that. So I encourage you to try it out for free using Callings.ai/Albert. and we look forward to seeing you on the platform. If you have questions about how to use it or feedback on how it works, you can just click this button right here, and that goes right to people like me and my co-founder. So thanks for sitting through this. And at this point, I will get off the stage and we can go to the Q&A.
Garrett, one of the questions that I think deserves a voiceover is Callings communicating at all with people's HR departments? So it's a two-part question, really. One is, what do employers have access to on our platform?
Okay.
And two is, when people apply for a job, does their application go to the company's corporate site, or is it a separate process that they download it and then apply on the site?
Yeah, and as I tried to mention earlier, we don't share your information without your permission ever. We don't train models on it. We don't share it out to other people. Our assumption is that your data is yours until you choose to share it. For example, when you apply for a job. When you do apply for a job, we will take you to where we found the job opportunity. And by the way, you can add jobs from LinkedIn, Indeed, and other job sources. We're job agnostic. So our goal is for you to find the best opportunities you can. We have a plugin that you can use so you can bring jobs in that you find from LinkedIn and Indeed, or you can add them manually from a hiring company site. And we don't share any information other than when you go through the application process, and we bring you to that place, but you go through the application process yourself. There are some AI tools where they do your submission for you, and we studied this in detail. And the assessment we have is that ATS and systems and company career sites are blocking those services, and that harms your candidacy because nobody wants a shotgun, right? Nobody wants resume spam. And so in many cases, companies are putting questions into the application process to try and trip you up. The one that I heard of recently was, please draw a cat and include it in your application. So, so I encourage you to find authentic jobs at companies and make the applications, right? Your job hunt's going to last on average, statistics wise, about 5 to 6 months. You might get it faster, you might get it slower, but if you apply to 3 to 5 jobs a day, which is easily doable on our platform, you can do those authentically. And you avoid the shotgun rejection system that's being built. So I don't know if
Another
that answered the
question.
question, but
Yeah, another question, Garrett, is, are they real jobs or are these phishing or
yeah.
evergreen jobs?
So we are in the process of rolling out, as I mentioned, a new job system in our platform. And the core goal that we had was to bring you the majority of the jobs only from hiring company sites that we know are authentic. The reason that there's so many fake jobs, they're not fake per se, but what happens is companies pay advertising networks to promote jobs. And when a job is posted, they want all the money from that contract. So they keep jobs up even after the company fills them. And that's why there's so many garbage jobs out there, is because, the companies that are getting paid to show those advertisements, they're going to keep doing it and take and claim all of that advertising money, even if the company fills the job. And so our goal instead is to bring you jobs from hiring company sites and then be able to tell you when that job is pulled so you know exactly where you stand.
People want to know if they're going to get this webinar, a recording of it.
Yes,
Yes.
it'll be under the coaching tab on the calling site, which is free, by the way, forever. So you can get that as soon as Albert gets me the recording, I will put it up on the site. One
And then
question I saw actually from Bill Lazor was, apparently there are interviews where they demand that you turn the camera off. And he wondered if you had any
Huh.
recommendations for how to handle an interview like that.
I'd like to know, I guess, why they wanted the camera off.
I had heard that in some cases companies do that so that they're quote unquote not biased by what they see about a candidate.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense, I think.
My recommendation, Bill, is that you just be much more ebullient with your voice. Because that's all they can hear. I don't know if you had any uh, better recommendations, Albert, than that.
Yeah, I don't really have any other recommendations. I guess you can refer to your notes more, but you still need to sound like you are the one who is talking and not the not reading off of some machine, right? Like, yeah.
I think one of the things you said that strikes me strongest is that importance of being authentic
Yeah, very much so.
and being a real person in an age in which, there is so much AI.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yep. Very much so. Cool. I
Are
think
there
there's a
any
lot
other
of
questions?
questions.
Feel free to add them to the web chat, and we can answer them.
Yeah.
Hi, Eden. If you could type your question in the chat, that would be great. I don't think we have a mechanism for turning on your microphone.
We do, but I don't really ever want to turn it on just in case they say something. So, say something bad.
Yeah. So Rob asks, how would you compare or contrast Callings.ai versus LinkedIn for job searching? Well, LinkedIn is obviously the global truth for the business social graph, right? So that's where people are with their LinkedIn profiles. Um, our approach is that what LinkedIn has not done is focused on the process of a job hunt because they have other priorities, and so that's where we're investing our time. Um, and so, they allow you to save jobs, but we offer a full CRM for job tracking. We try and match you against jobs using the information we have about you semantically to find you jobs that are the perfect match. We don't get paid to show jobs to eyeballs, so we're less steered that way. Um, our focus is on bringing you tools that help you in what is increasingly a complicated process. And LinkedIn has many constituencies, recruiters, salespeople, social
Yeah.
media. And so, they have those as their main businesses. And so I think that's the real difference. We integrate and work very closely with LinkedIn because it's the social graph. And so we point you to them to do certain tasks in the job hunt where they're really irreplaceable. And so our feeling is we're LinkedIn's best friend. So another question is, do we help with resume writing and building process? Our assumption is you either have a resume or a LinkedIn profile to start with, and then we have powerful tools to help you improve on that. If you're starting and have never had a resume before, we don't currently have that tool to build a resume from scratch. But what we've discovered in talking with users is we haven't really found many people that are in that situation. Almost everybody has a base resume. And then we have tools which I didn't show you today, which really help you using the Socratic method of talking with our AI to work with you to build a truly accurate and authentic resume.
Let's do one more question. If you have any additional questions, I would encourage you to go ahead and reach out to me or Garrett. I'll drop my LinkedIn here and I'm going to go look for Garrett's. Garrett, let's do one more question. You can pick.
So this might be a good one for both of us, Albert. From your experience, what level of AI fluency is required by companies these days, and what does that entail?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it really
Sonia.
depends. I think we're still at the very beginning stage. So, a lot of the data out there right now says that companies want in on AI, but few have actually found the ROI that they want out of it. I think showcasing that you experiment with AI on the side and that you use AI for your day-to-day business and things like that is a really great place to be. Like, obviously, you don't need to know how to create agents per se. or that you don't know advanced prompting. But I think that having a good idea of what goes in a prompt and how AI can be beneficial to your job is going to go a long way versus just not doing anything at all about it.
I think that's great. The only
Yeah.
thing I would add is it's it's kind of like the future, right? So you've got to dive into it and use it and learn it. And uh, and that will make you more comfortable with it.
Yep.
And if you look at progress with technology, I'm old enough to remember when the web first came out, and I view this as the same type of revolution.
Yep.
And the people that learned even the basics of how the web worked early, recouped a lot of benefits. And so, you know, I would go and use ChatGPT, try our platform, which is AI, throughout, and it will make you more comfortable, and then you can figure out how to use tools because ultimately it's a tool, and
Yep.
human beings have progressed by being tool builders and tool users, and so
Yep. Well, cool, Garrett. I know there's a lot of questions from the rest of you. I just dropped in our LinkedIn profiles. So if you have questions, if you have thoughts, please reach out to both of us that way. Garrett, any final thoughts before maybe I give my final thoughts?
thank you all for your time today, and you know, uh, just go out there with confidence and be yourself. I truly believe that at the end of the day, when you hit the interview, it's a human to human experience. And, AI can help you prepare for that moment, but at that moment, it really is you. And just don't forget the amazing qualities that have gotten you this far in your career.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you all for watching this webinar today. It's been recorded. Albert's List, we have a lot of other events coming up. Feel free to check them out or go to callings.ai/Albert to sign up for your free trial today. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Best of luck in your job search, and we will see you all soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Albert.
Thank you.